Hello, Clement29 here with another Topic of the Week video. This week is going to be a little bit different than some of my other topic videos, and I promise I'm not going to do one as long as my last Metal Gear one. That one is a self-indulgent topic that I ranted for almost 2 hours on because I really wanted to rant about Metal Gear. And I've been saving that topic too. But this week I was actually, like I say, I was almost not going to do this topic because it was a very open-ended personal question, and I generally have been avoiding personal questions, which I will probably end up doing something of that in a more like a little side series of videos of topics that I don't want to do in my topics videos, but stuff I still want to talk about. But this week's topic was sent by an anon, and they asked, "What is your favorite video game? The game you've replayed the most because it has such high replay value. What does it offer in terms of gameplay, characters, plot, world building / mythos, character design / environments? What sets it apart in your eyes as such a great game? Would you consider your favorite game to be timeless?" There are several games that I've played numerous times. Resident Evil 4 comes to mind. That's the first game that I had that I replayed. I replayed that game 4 times, and I'm still in the middle of I played that game years ago. And on the Wii edition, I'd say the Wii edition because I found using the GameCube controller to be entirely unplayable. But I played that game so many times, and I'm still in the middle of I'm near the end of a professional run. On the professional difficulty, and man, I'm not a horror guy. I don't like horror. I hate horror. But I love Resident Evil 4. It's not horror as in like just trying to scare you, but it's tense, it's suspenseful. Played that game several times and I love that game so much. There are games that I haven't replayed a bunch of times but still absolutely love. I have to say Deus Ex Human Revolution. I played that on my Wii U. Love that game. I love that game so much. Let's see what other games I have. Okami. Okami is a good game. I still haven't finished that. I have it on my Wii. That is a fantastic game. Arkham games. Arkham City is great. Arkham Origins, freaking love Origins. Don't get the hate it got. I actually played in the game. I mean, I was hesitant going into that game. I mean, I ended up loving it so much. Halo Reach, Halo ODST. Oh, my Halo ODST. It's one of my favorites. I have a lot of games that I absolutely love. But there's one game that I absolutely love and I consider to be one of the best games of all time, if not the best game ever, at least from my perspective, my favorite game of all time. Metal Gear Solid 3. No, this is not going to be redundant. This is going to be entirely focused on what I love about this game. I would have to say, when I first played the Metal Gear Solid series, I got the Essential Collection. I borrowed Metal Gear Solid 1, and then I got the Essential Collection, played 2 and 3. I played Metal Gear Solid 3 6 times in a row. I played 3 in a row on normal difficulty, and then I played 3 in a row on hard. I loved it. I loved it so much. Like, I can't even begin to describe how much I loved that game. And when the 3DS version came out, I mean, I didn't get it immediately, but I ended up getting it and playing it with the Circle Pad Pro. I still say the Metal Gear Solid 3D with the Circle Pad Pro is the best Metal Gear game. Period. Bar none. You get all the great gameplay and this level design and story of Metal Gear Solid 3 with a much needed update. In fact, after playing the demo, and I played the demo for Metal Gear Solid 3D so many times, which is simply just the Virtuous mission with some of the exposition cut out, but playing that, I played it so much, I went back and replayed my PS2, and I could not play it. I just got here, I'm just sitting there like, oh my gosh, the improvements in the gameplay is so good, I cannot play this. And this is much better than Peace Walker, and I played Peace Walker in the HD collection, so it had the much improved controls. But this has a much better story, and I like the consistent level design rather than bite-sized since Peace Walker was meant to be portable. But let me get on to the actual topic. The game we play most. The game, it's hard to talk about Metal Gear Solid 3 sometimes just because I love it so much. Metal Gear Solid 3, it has such an amazing blend, and I think people have described it that unlike any other Metal Gear game, everything about this came together in the right time. Harry Gregson Williams wanted to do a more like jungly, more natural like music, and Hideo Kojima was already thinking of making the game being set in Russian jungles, which don't exist, but this is Metal Gear. I can stand them inventing Russian jungles as long as everything else is good, and everything else is so good. So good. The gameplay of the original one are, should I say, subsistence. Not the original. The original one didn't have the third-person camera. It only had the top-down, which is abysmal. I can see why some people didn't enjoy playing it at first. It does keep some of the stuff of not being able to move when you're shooting, which I kind of feel is an outdated mechanic. But still, I was able to play that game 6 times in a row even with those old, at this point, archaic controls. But playing the 3DS version, and I will talk a lot about the 3DS version in terms of the controls, because despite it being a little confusing at first, especially since the CQC button is the right bottom trigger on that, and on the PS2 it's the square button. So I'm used to pressing square, which is not the same, so I had to relearn it. But once I got used to that, it's still great. In fact, it's so much better because being able to aim and move, and not just that, but switch from first person to third person to auto aim with just a press of the button. Just you press the Y button. I believe it's the Y button. I don't know. Like, I have my 3DS right here. Yeah, the Y button. With just pressing the Y button, boom, you can just change, and then you can do the 3DS version is so good. It is so good. The level, I have to say, in terms of, level design, this is probably some of the best level design in the franchise. And it's so great because, one of the things that there was an issue with, and I believe I talked about this in my Twin Snakes video. When you take Metal Gear Solid 1 and you gave it all the advancements of Metal Gear Solid 2's gameplay, in a lot of ways people felt it broke the game. It giving you the ability to just aim and shoot, pop, pop, pop. Alright, all the guards here are dead. I can move, or knocked out, now I can just move around now. But with this, the updated controls from the 3DS version it works so well, and I think this is something that's so funny. It actually improves the level design. The added abilities in this play to the strengths of the level design. And it's so funny because it's weird, because I guess I would have to go through and show you every single level. And a lot of it is almost intangible and something I would have to probably sit around and do a lot of analysis for. But each level area moves smoothly. It's generally fairly linear with, you have an area and you start in this point, you need to get to that point. And you can do however you want, doing in some areas bigger than others, some are more linear than others, but you still need to sneak from one area to the other, or, kill everyone, if you're so inclined. Very, very few times, and granted this may just be because I've played it so many times, I rarely got confused where I was going. But even back when I was first playing it, I think there were only a couple times when I got turned around. And that's only because I'm missing, like, because sometimes you think you're going one way, you end up getting turned around and you go someplace else and you're just looking there and you're like, wait a minute, I was just here. Oh. But then that again, that's what the map is for. The level design is just fun. The way it's designed, the way your weapons are given, and you know, just what you earn in playing through it. The area gives you plenty. And it's, I mean, I guess you could say in some ways the new gameplay does break it a little bit, but only a little bit, really. And in a way that makes it more fun and more engaging. And I would go back and I already played it, the 3DS version, once, which would make it my 7th play through the game overall. And I really want to go back and do it again. I just have other games I need to be finishing. It's just fun to play, you know. It gives you this area. It gives you, again, another thing. It also gives you a variety of areas to play in, from the deserty areas, which once you know, it's funny because once you know what you're doing, you know, those areas become a lot simpler than when your first time. You have the forest areas, the jungle areas. You have the buildings. You have the more concrete areas. You have the docks, the waters, and you have the base of Groznygrad and the snowy areas. It's like, and it's just, wow, it just, the level design works so well. Characters. Here's something that's so great about Metal Gear Solid 3, and I talked about this in my last video about Kojima, liking the series or not. And Metal Gear Solid 3 obviously was a time when he was very much liking the series. He had gotten over his like tantrum with Metal Gear Solid 2, and he came back and was in love with the series again. And Metal Gear Solid 3 was, I would say, it's a love letter to Metal Gear. It just, the whole thing, mixing basically Rambo with James Bond in terms of themes, especially for Naked Snake, having those, and it's just having those qualities of that rough and grizzled Rambo, but also being able to be suave like James Bond, especially when involving paramedic. She's the only woman he actually flirts with. So oddly enough, his love interest, Eva, he doesn't really flirt with her. A lot of it is discussion. She tries to seduce him, and he doesn't do anything with her until after the mission is over. But that's a topic for another time. The characters in this are probably the best in the series, in all honesty. One of the terrible things they were all wasted in Metal Gear Solid 4, when it was just like, well, everyone's evil in this game. But Naked Snake, this was our first time we ever played as a young big boss, and ultimately we would get to see his continuing story through Peace Walker, Portable Ops, and then Peace Walker. But this was really, first time you actually, you play as Snake, and then you play as Raiden, and then you go back to the 60s, and this is Big Boss before he was Big Boss. And, you get to see him go from being this very charming, just sort of goofy, but very patriotic and very dutiful man, to being entirely broken by the end of the game. And prequels tend to be, I tend to be a lot more favorable towards them if they're dark, because a lot of times these darker things need to happen for a future game or an older game, later chronologically, but earlier released. It needs to happen. Big Boss needed to become a bad guy. He needed to be broken so that he became the raging warlord that we see in Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. But besides that, the whole cast in this game is so amazing. The support cast, easily the best in the series. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 1, is an easy second in terms of this, since they're all great characters. Colonel Campbell, Naomi, Otacon, you know, Mei Ling, and in some cases, Gray Fox. But you know, that support team, I mean, it's classic. These are some classic characters. But Metal Gear Solid 3 is so much more enjoyable. These characters are hilarious, along with giving, you know, a lot of, you know, plot exposition. Sigint, with his, he thinks he's the only sane man, but he's just as wacky as the rest of them, just in a different way. Zero, who in some cases is a very, very serious and very, you know, very duty-bound commander, sitting here who's always keeps his promises, but then you get him rambling about tea and James Bond is literally the greatest movie ever of all time. I wouldn't be surprised if they made 50 more movies of this. You know, and then you have Paramedic, who is the doctor, and she's nice. She definitely is probably the nicest character in the entire franchise, on top of being a complete derp. They used to call her Quack. Yeah, because she never shuts up. Hey. And the conversations, a lot of them involve all other ones talking to each other. Especially the ones, the glowing mushrooms. You eat the glowing mushrooms and it recharges the batteries that Snake has. And then Paramedic's just sitting there. She's like, what? I don't know what I'm doing. What? And she's talking to Sigint and Major Zero. And you also have Eva, of course. And while Eva's not my favorite character, I did like her for what she was. And I do think she would be a very interesting character to explore. Especially given her backstory and the fact that she was kidnapped from a young age. And oh yeah, by the way, if I haven't said this before, and I didn't say it before, spoilers. I'm going to be talking so many spoilers about this. If you don't know anything about it, please play this game. But you find out that Eva, you know, she was basically a child raised by the philosophers, and that she was kidnapped as a young child and raised in the Chinese philosophers' and was basically a Chinese agent. You know, the triple and quadruple games that have been played, and a young Ocelot. And like, I think a lot of people, I've read a review that, or not read, it was a video review, or whatever. It was a video on Metal Gear Solid 3, and it talked about how no one expected this for Ocelot. Seeing him in Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2, you would probably build up to him being, oh, he's probably always been like this. But you didn't expect him to walk out doing that and being super flamboyant and over the top. And the kid's only 20. He's 20 in Metal Gear Solid 3. And he's like, you can see there are shades of the future. And ultimately you find out that he actually is just like his future self. Just, he's a little more reserved in the future. And that's a relative term. Excuse me. And then you have I mean, yeah, an Ocelot. I mean, you find out that he was a triple agent, running, basically playing all three sides in it, and ultimately playing for his own. It was great because you don't know that going in, and when you get to the ending conversation, you find out that Ocelot played everybody. You would think he's just some guy, and you think his story is pretty simple, but no, it's not. It's great. Volgin, and a lot of people don't really like Volgin, and I can understand why. Volgin isn't inherently interesting on his own, but as a villain, as a Metal Gear villain, and for what this is, a romp in the Cold War, he is such a perfect villain for this. He's over the top, he's cruel, he's an idiot, but he's immensely physically powerful and has a ton of resources at his disposal. And I mean, while, you know, Liquid Snake was a bit of an idiot, he still was smart enough to run things for a while. And he still had his own personal motivations. His whole issue with Big Boss, feeling that Snake stole his, birthright by being born as a superior clone, and the lies, and this ended up being a lie that Ocelot had convinced him of. He was still a really interesting character. Volgin isn't inherently interesting, and I'm glad he died. Just ignore Phantom Pain. Just ignore Phantom Pain. I'm glad he died because, that's what he served. And a lot of times people would say, well, I enjoyed him. Yeah, I enjoyed him for what he was, but if Volgin would come back and just be like, I'm a zombie, it's like, that's absurd even for Metal Gear. Now, I think that's it. I mean, there are a couple side characters. There's Sokolov, and I liked him. There's Granite, and Granite is freaking hilarious. And I did like the fact that this is our first introduction, really, to Huey, mentioned as the American pen pal that he had. And we actually didn't know if this was, at the time, until Peace Walker came in, if this was Emmerich, the guy who worked on the Manhattan Project, or Hal's father, who we later found out is named Huey, or nicknamed Huey. And, that was just one of the reasons it ties together great in that point. But, and Granite is a fun character, even if the explanation for Metal Gear doesn't sound as great. You also have to remember that he's near blackout drunk at that point, but he's still a fun character. The world building, and one of the things that I have to say about this in terms of the writing of this game, aside from it being well written, the writing of this game it built up the Metal Gear franchise and the lore. We had learned about the Patriots in Metal Gear Solid 2, and as dumb as that was, this does, foreshadow a few things, especially when I nearly had a heart attack at this point when I was first playing. When Zero says the code words are "Who are the Patriots?" and "Lolly Lula Lo," and I'm like, I'm having Metal Gear Solid 2 flashbacks. It's the Lolly Lula Lo. But here's the good thing. Here's the great thing about that. It took something that was stupid, made slight references to it, but ultimately is so removed from the Patriots plot that it's not affected at all by the complete insanity of Metal Gear Solid 2, which is great. It also doesn't. Metal Gear Solid series had never really been big on the past. It had been looking for the future. The only past that really mattered was Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, and even then, you really didn't need to know much because everything was explained in Metal Gear Solid. But Metal Gear Solid 3 moved it back 40 years, and we learned how we saw Big Boss's start of darkness. We saw, the original, before. We're not playing as a clone this time. We were playing as Big Boss himself, as presumably early 30s. I believe that's what the character list or character sheet listed him as when they were auditioning, when David Hayter was doing tests. But it builds it backwards and actually is a big foundation. It introduces, it takes the idea of the philosophers from Metal Gear Solid 2 and says this isn't just a red herring. The Philosophers is actually a super important organization that came about during World War II, which Volgin kindly explains in a 20-minute cutscene, which I still, cutscenes are great. And it really builds the story outwards, and you get all this great base, and it's just like, oh, it's so disappointing that Metal Gear Solid 4 came after this. And just is like, yeah, I don't care about anything. But, it's such a great improvement in a lot of ways, because Oh, another thing is to talk about environments. I'll talk about the environments in a minute. And then just the writing of this game is very much on a more personal level than the other games. Metal Gear Solid 1 is the closest that comes to having that personal story. And Peace Walker does, in a lot of ways, have that really, really personal narrative. It just doesn't do it as well. The crux of the story, the running theme is loyalty. In all honesty. As the boss puts it. No, she's a great character. I forgot to talk about her. How did I forget to talk about her? The boss is the linchpin of the entire franchise. She is what caused the fall of Big Boss. She is what caused Big Boss to hate governments and caused him to eventually start Outer Heaven. Now, it wasn't the only thing, but it was what got him on that path. And she is such a great character, and her misguided attempts to basically unite the world, which failed. And, you know, the boss is definitely a fantastic example of a true, strong female character. She was willing to die by the hands of her own student, a surrogate son, because she felt it was her duty. And she felt that by fulfilling her duty, she would help unite the world. Because she saw from space, she saw the world, that it was just one world, that we're all people, that it's not about countries, it's not about governments and ideologies. It's, you know, we're not meant to be separated like this, you know. And having an international team comprised of at least Russians and Americans. We don't know the exact details, but you know, she's used to working with people who are international. She fell in love with a Russian. She had a child with him. And she thought her death would do good. It really just caused more problems. And this ultimately, in terms of thematics, is what drives Big Boss to hate governments, because the governments were willing to just throw the boss, one of their best soldiers ever, just a World War II hero who even in her 40s in Metal Gear Solid 3 was still an incredibly efficient and incredibly deadly soldier. I have a lot of emotions about the boss. And the writing around her is, she is how you write a strong female character. She's not, she is physically strong. She is imposing to even Volgin, who's like 6.5 feet tall and can literally shoot lightning out of his hands and kill people. And he's intimidated by her. But she still has a side to her that is very much caring and loving and motherly. And motherly, I would actually describe as her key defining trait. It's the way she treats Snake. It's the way she treats the Cobra unit, even though they're all older than her. Just shows you the kind of you know, unstoppable force she is, the kind of implacable woman she is. The fact that she stands as a rock for people, which in a way she was a rock for Snake until he had to kill her. And he had no rock to stand on because he relied on her. I mean, she's literally Ocelot's mother. But the writing of her is so good. And one of the key things that I have to talk about in terms of the story is actually it's something I didn't really notice until my later playthroughs of Metal Gear Solid 3. Is that if you watch every single fight scene between Snake and the boss, he progressively gets better across the game. The initial fight in the Virtuous mission, she just destroys him. She breaks his arm. I think she cracks some ribs. She tosses him over a bridge. Well, she didn't mean to kill him, but and the next time she sees him, he manages to, you know, get a few moves in before she takes him down and basically has a decisive victory over him. And then you fight him again, he wins a little bit more. You know, he puts up a better fight. And then afterwards, he basically fights her on even ground until she ultimately, you know, beats him, and then in the final battle, he wins, and you play that. And that build, and it's funny. There's this build up across the games of him beating the boss, and it's so subtle. And like this is definitely the Metal Gear Solid game that hits me the most in terms of like just there's always something new to learn about this game. In terms of gameplay, in terms of story, there's always something you can look at. I love that. As analytical and as much as I pay attention, I watched Inception, and I was confused that some people weren't able to keep up, and it's like Inception was easy for me to follow, and I absorb a lot of information from a first watching of a movie. It's why I generally don't watch movies a second time unless I really enjoy it. But this is just, I want to keep experiencing it over and over and over in that experience, and just, it's one of the few things that has almost completely reduced me to tears by the end of the game. I was an emotional mess. Oh. So yeah, it takes the philosophers, really, and a point that I was making earlier, it takes the philosophers and it builds on it. It explains who they are and explains the philosopher's legacy, which ultimately becomes a key piece, which is the main MacGuffin in the game, is the philosopher's legacy. And there's this big three-way scramble between America, Russia, and China over getting the philosopher's legacy and all the money that Vulcan had. Character designs. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the Cobra Unit characters. The Cobra Unit are probably the least fleshed out of the villains. I mean, they're the opposite of Dead Cell, and that Dead Cell was over. And a lot of people felt they were over-explained and basically were just so weird. But it tried to give explanations to their powers and stuff. But then the Metal Gear Solid 3 is just like, yeah, we have a guy who basically crawls around like a spider, and we have a guy who can control hornets. We also have a guy who was a spirit medium, but he died, but he's actually a ghost, and he's following you throughout the entire game, if you know when to look. We have this other guy here who's 100 years old, and he's he can do photosynthesis. How? It's never explained. Well, unless you want to go with the Phantom Pain and be like, everyone had parasites in them. But it's never really explained. The game doesn't do anything, and I think it's the better for it. They talk about them, and you get a little bit of history on the unit, but other than that, we don't get their characters explained, which is, it's a good and a bad thing. I mean, if I had to take them not explained, only basic explanations versus over-explained messes with their characters on full blast anytime they're on screen, screaming their backstory and all their angst. And I'm thinking of you, Fortune. I would take the under-explained, because at the very least, they were fun boss fights. Character design, environment. And I'd have to talk about environment design. This is the first game in the series that really, well, since the earlier games, but the first in the Metal Gear Solid games to take place in a non-industrial area. Excuse me, you had Metal Gear Solid 1, you were in Shadow Moses. You had the Shadow Moses complex with some caves, really obnoxious caves, and you had some snowy areas. But other than that, it was within the confines of the base. And Metal Gear Solid 2 was the big shell facility in the tanker chapter, and tanker in the tanker chapter. And then Metal Gear Solid 3 is entirely like, outside of a few buildings, it's nature. You are outside, and I think this works so well. It's a nice change of pace, and I think this opens up a lot of opportunities, and this is I think one of the reasons why the game level design was so good. It opened up so many opportunities for level design and all this fun stuff, the grass and the stuff, all the camouflage system. It opened up so much stuff, and it was so much more visually interesting than the same drab environments over and over and over again, or that stupid orange all over the place in the big show and you're running outside. It's a shake-up in the series, and I do really wish we could have seen more of this. And I mean, you do get more stuff like this in Peace Walker, though Peace Walker is very different in terms of structure and level design. It's really interesting. The character designs, it's kind of hard to say. I like the fact that this game was retro. Since it takes place in the 60s, you don't have all the high tech. You don't have a solid-on radar. And it's so funny because I don't find myself missing it. You get the motion detector thing, but a lot of times I didn't even find myself using that. The environments are so interesting. It kept me engaged in what I was playing, and made me pay attention to everything more instead of looking up at the corner saying, alright, there's a dot there, and okay, I can move it. Also, it's not limited by the forced top-down perspective. This is the first game in the series that let you look around from a third-person perspective, and the game is all the better for it. And the designs, they match the retro era. The sneaking suit that Snake has, a lot of the camouflage suits are basically just a basic uniform, basic sneaking suit. It's not anything advanced. You do get a Russian-developed sneaking suit later in the game, and that's closer to the sneaking suits we see in Metal Gear Solid and onward. A lot of the characters, like Paramedic, is very, very 60s outfit. Sigint and Major Zero, they don't really invoke the era so much. Sigint is wearing like overalls and stuff because he's just more of a down to earth guy. It's just like, I just invent masks. I just invent stuff like masks that don't have moving lips. And then Zero is, outside of wearing his bomber jacket, is, when you see him later in the game, he's all, dressed up in a three-piece suit. But, yeah, the uniform designs and, everything is like an Eva being evocative of a 60s Bond girl, except turning out to be the femme fatale. She's, everything is so evocative of that era. But the great part is that it doesn't feel dated. It's a good modern story set in the past, because it doesn't try really hard to basically shove it in your face like, this is the time, even though that's very, very relevant because it takes place during the Cold War, which is insanely relevant to the plot. It's literally the basis for it. It does make lots of references to historical things, and I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of the discussions that you have with the the support characters feels a lot more, in a lot of ways, more genuine, because they can look at history, they can look at the last 40 years and make references to stuff, and even foreshadowing things. Like, they can reference stuff in the 60s, when they can reference things that happened. And I haven't done full research on it, but Paramedic does at one point talk about how a research study recently came out, and it was talking about how smoking is bad for you, and he's just sitting there smoking a cigar like, cool story. But she Paramedic talks about Godzilla, and she talks about the original Godzilla movie, the original one, and she talked about how they didn't have an American, or No, well, there was an American release, but if you wanted to see the original in its entirety and intact from its original production, you had to go to Japan to watch it. Because they didn't have that in America. It was brought over very, very differently. With a lot of edits. But, and though they make all these different mentions, and it makes everything feel more alive, and it makes it feel more grounded. Because you have characters talking about real things. In Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 4, they all take place in the past, or in the future. So each of them, when they talk, they have to make up things that are going on. That's why the politics feel very restricted to what's going on instead of just things that are happening in the world. They're inventing new politics. Hell, in Metal Gear 2, the USSR was still around. The game was made in the late 80s and released in 1990. So a game that took place in 1999, I guess they assumed that the Soviet Empire would still be around, the USSR. But then it fell in 91. And then they had to change that with the re-release of Metal Gear 2 with Subsistence. But it's like, and that's the downfall of having to predict the future. In some ways, they do make things that were, some ideas that were accurate. A lot of it, though, is just stuff that obviously doesn't make as much sense. But, that's the pratfall of having to write in the future. But when you're writing in the past, this is what makes Metal Gear Solid 3 feel so great. And less so in Portable Ops and in Peace Walker. Because Peace Walker still does make a lot of references to stuff, but a lot of it is invented stuff. Or distorted stuff, as the stuff with Che Guevara being portrayed as like this great hero and stuff. But that's another topic. But Metal Gear Solid 3 just feels so grounded in that. What sets it apart in your eyes for such a great game? Everything about this game clicks, especially in the 3DS version. The characters are great. The setup is great. The story is great. The actual plot is good. The expansion of the mythos is good. The gameplay is good, and the 3DS improves on that in every way by giving you modern controls. The level design is good, and everything plays so smoothly. Everything clicked. Like I said, everything clicked. Hideo Kojima, Yoji Shinkawa, Harry Gregson Williams, and I'm sure all the people working at, at Kojima Productions, they all just clicked in this game, and everything. And they told Hideo Kojima some of his ideas were stupid, like making the end fight last literally 2 weeks. And the checks and balances worked so well, and it just blows my mind how well this game turned out. It is my favorite game of all time. Would I consider it timeless? Yes. Because it's a game that Metal Gear Solid 1 in a lot of ways feels dated, not just in terms of the actual graphics and stuff in the story, but really the story and the plot does feel in some ways dated. It's still a great story, and it's still excellently written. Metal Gear Solid 2 feels really dated, especially when they start talking about controlling memes, and I'm just sitting here like, never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. I'm like, yeah, congratulations, GW, you're controlling Rickrolling and Neon Cat. And Pepe, the rarest of Pepes. I can't take that game seriously. Memes. But Metal Gear Solid 4 I think is the one that feels the most dated. The ones in the past, though, they took place in a different time period in the past, regardless. So it's hard to feel dated when it technically already was dated. It's designed to be that way, and I think this actually works to its advantage. Because it doesn't feel like it's trying to be over the top, Because, it tries to be, when something tries to be super modern, when technology inevitably passes, it makes it look really lame. Like when you watch old Bond movies and you see them, like, they have this, like, basic radar system and they're just like, this is the greatest thing of ever all time, click it, whoa! When you watch it, you're like, my 3DS is more advanced than that. It's just what happens. But with this, you know, the technology they had is outdated by 40 years. So, but it's all designed to be in that time period, so it doesn't treat this as like, I mean, they do talk about advancements in technology, but it doesn't treat it with the same cheesiness that a lot of times accompanies those Bond movies. And it does it in a much better way. It feels more natural because they're not sitting here being impressed by everything, so everything feels more natural, to be honest. And this game it's a good game, honestly. I mean, and this isn't the only game that'll be timeless. Other games that I talked about will be timeless. Okami will be timeless. You know, Halo ODST will be timeless. You know, I think Deus Ex Human Revolution is timeless. Even more so than its predecessor / you know, sequel, chronologically speaking. But this game just sticks out to me as my favorite game ever. I love this game. I've ranted. I probably hit an hour. I can't really tell, but yeah, I consider this game timeless. And people can look back at this, and I remember seeing this one video from Super Bunny Hop, and he was talking about how he feels like this is the Mariana Trench of video games. How he's like 10 years playing this game, 10 years later, I'm still finding new ways to play it. And even though I've read a lot of ways, just experimenting. Like when I played it on the 3DS, I played it differently, and there were some parts entirely new experiences for me. Having played the game 6 times prior, I found a new way to experience some parts. And it's just, like I said, everything comes together. The gameplay works, the plot works, the plot is so good, and I know people who don't even like Metal Gear Solid and think Metal Gear Solid 3 is great. And they would say that the only Metal Gear Solid game they like is 3, which is right, such a good choice. And even people just have to unanimously agree this is a great game, and I consider this the crowning achievement of the Metal Gear Solid series, and really the high point of the series, because it kind of just went downhill after that. But yeah, that's why Metal Gear Solid 3 is my favorite game of all time. That was another topic. I think I really just needed the positivity of this topic, talking about one of my favorite games of all times after the negativity of ranting about all the stuff I didn't like about Metal Gear Solid for 2 hours. So, this is my catharsis. And it is so good to talk about this. It also helps that I had a pretty great day anyway. But this is good, isn't it? But Metal Gear Solid 4's few good scenes. Anyway, so yeah, that's it for this topic. If you want to check out last week's topic, check out right here. Yeah. Check out last week's topic here, where I rant for 2 hours about Metal Gear Solid's retcons and inconsistencies. And you can talk to me here. What am I saying? I'm tired right now. You can check out my next week's video when I get to it right here. So, if you have a topic you want, if you want to submit, wow, I'm tired. If you have a topic you'd like to submit, you can check out the rules below that I'll be posting on both YouTube and Tumblr. Just make sure that the topic is fictional and it's not something real world. Make sure it's something more specific than why do you like X or what do you think Y. Because I've tried topics like that before and they don't work. It ends up being like my Mass Effect video and it's just a mess. Yeah, I mean, just make sure that it's, you know, gives you something specific. And I especially like topics like this that basically give a line of like 4 or 5 questions. Really like those topics because those really give a great structure to the conversation. But yeah, so yeah, that's it. That's it for today. this week. Thank you for watching, and tune in next week for my next topic video.